Excellent. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mike Russell. I'm a lawyer with the Legal Aid Society of Cleveland. And today we are going to talk about how to give help to clients who are facing driver's license suspensions. I work at Legal Aid with the community engagement practice group. I focus on representing groups of people, and they be either nonprofits or cooperatives, or neighborhood associations or tenants unions. But I used to do a lot of housing, and I have some familiarity with driver's license suspensions, thank goodness. I am here with the brilliant Ashley Loike from the Cuyahoga County Public Defender's Office. And our plan today is to just sort of run through the common, the debt-related driver's license suspension scheme that the state of Ohio has, certain facts and statistics about how many folks are facing these types of suspensions, the pitfalls that they involve. We're going to run through some common suspensions that we see, and also talk about how to find out information on behalf of clients about driver's license suspensions, share some good resources. So I have a PowerPoint presentation, of course, and I will start sharing my screen now to get that going. All right, can everybody see that? Great. So today we're going to talk about clients with suspended driver's licenses. Fun fact, did you know that most people have their licenses suspended in Ohio, not for driving dangerously, but for not being able to pay a debt, right? A financial problem like child support or insurance or court fines and fees. And this is not an isolated issue. This affects millions of Ohioans every year. Ohio imposes about 3 million of these debt-related suspensions on drivers every year. And the driving age population in Ohio is estimated to be about 9.4 million people, right? So that is a large percentage of drivers in the state of Ohio that face these types of suspensions based on debt. How does it happen? Here's a really great video that was made not by us, but by the Fines and Fees Justice Center, which is a national advocacy group that looks into fines and fees and driver's license suspensions and tries to educate the public and also policymakers about the pitfalls involved in those types of suspensions. So rather than, well, I'm going to click the link. I think there might be an ad, but hopefully it won't be too long.
La Roche-Posay Amphilio Sunscreen visibly reduces the appearance of sun damage.
Sorry.
Fluid lightweight sunscreen.
Okay, here we go.
The biggest problem you've probably never heard of affects over 10 million people in the United States, and it costs taxpayers millions of dollars. Because of it, people lose their jobs. It disproportionately affects people of color, but it's bad for us all. And it needs to stop now.
Hi, my name is Celeste. I live in Rochester, New York. When I was 16, I got a couple of minor traffic tickets that, because I was living on my own, I couldn't afford to pay. Okay, later, I'm 21 and pregnant with my daughter. Driving to work, and I get caught in a speed trap. I was pulled over and found out then that my driver's license was suspended. I owed over $1,000 all from these old tickets. I was arrested for driving on a suspended license and spent 15 days in jail. Pregnant. I'm out now, but barely have enough money for rent and groceries, let alone traffic fines. And now I don't have a license either. Because I can't legally drive my daughter to school, I have to take her on the bus, then take the bus to work, then take the bus back to school to pick her up. Altogether, it's over 3 hours.
In 44 states, driver's licenses are restricted for failure to pay fines and fees. Without a license, you can't get to work, can't support your family, can't take your kids to school or your mom to the doctor. All because you can't afford to pay increasingly steep fines and fees.
Hey, my name's Kevin, and to get to school, I have to drive over the Midpoint Bridge. And I went over the bridge 3 times before I found out that the credit card linked to my SunPass account had expired. 3 tolls, $6. and I didn't know about the tickets because they didn't put my apartment number on the notice, so it was returned. And one day I was driving to work, got pulled over, the officer told me that my driver's license was suspended, and I was charged with a crime, driving with a suspended license. When I tried to get the tickets taken care of and my license back, I found out it was going to cost me almost $1,000. Fortunately, my parents could help me out and I got my license back, but if my parents didn't have the money to help me, I would have gone to jail.
This isn't about removing dangerous drivers from the road, it's about criminalizing poverty. And rather than making us more safe, it makes us less safe.
My name is Susan. I'm a district attorney in Tennessee. My job is to keep our community safe. Law enforcement and prosecutors should be spending their time on real crime, not the crime of being poor. And when we suspend people's licenses, they can't get insurance, which everyone who drives needs to have. You want your DA's office to focus on those individuals that are destroying lives. And I've never heard people tell me they're afraid of someone driving on a suspended license because they couldn't pay their fines and fees.
Suspensions are hurting individuals, their families, and our communities. Now you know about the problem. Work with us to solve it. Find out more at freetodrive.org.
Okay, we're back. I realized something. I was so excited to get started with the presentation, I forgot to give a brief introduction about what legal aid is and what we do. I know most of the folks on the line are service providers who are familiar with legal aid, but just in case you're not familiar, legal aid provides free legal services to people with low incomes. We strive to protect opportunity and equity and justice for those and to work on systemic solutions. We work in a wide variety of types of cases, including debt and housing and health and public benefits and family law. And like I said earlier, we also represent groups in addition to individuals. And we operate in five counties, Cuyahoga, Geauga, Lake Lorraine, and Ashtabula. The best way to apply for legal services through legal aid is through our website. There's a link there to apply online. A potential client will provide some information, and our intake department will get back to them. So if you have any questions about that process, we can handle that at the end of the presentation, but that's legal aid. All right, moving on. What do we know about debt-related suspensions in Ohio? We know it's a huge problem, right? We know that most debt-related suspensions are actually on drivers who do not have driver's licenses, which is sort of a bizarre thing to think about, right? You can get a debt-related suspension because you owe a debt or you fail to pay a fine or a fee. You don't have to have a driver's license, but that suspension will prevent you from getting one, okay? So it's a barrier to even initiate the process to start applying for a driver's license if you get one of these suspensions before you even have one. The total amount owed for driver's license suspensions for drivers in Ohio is a substantial amount of money, and most of it is unpaid. We're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars. Driver's license suspensions occur in some part of the state more frequently than in others. As you can imagine, they are concentrated, although it's a problem everywhere, they're concentrated in urban centers. And they're concentrated in, even more specifically, zip codes around Ohio that have higher poverty rates, and also zip codes that have higher percentage people of color living in them, right? And because we know that correlation, we know that suspensions, at least of this type, are strongly related to poverty and race. And if you want to know more about those numbers and that correlation, Legal Aid put out a report last year called Road to Nowhere, which I have a link to at the end of the presentation, and that delves really deeply into a lot of data that we received. All right, how big is the debt-related suspension problem in Ohio? We're talking about 1 million drivers a year have a suspended license, right? On average, each driver that faces a suspension has more than one, has 3 suspensions, right? Because these can pile up, right? One suspension is not all there is. You can have multiple suspensions, multiple types of suspensions, multiple suspensions in multiple courts, or because of actions in multiple courts. And for every 100 Ohioans of driving age, there are 30 suspensions. So we're talking about a lot of drivers and a lot of suspensions. What are debt-related suspensions, right? In general, there are suspensions that either are the result of or produce a debt, right, that has to be satisfied in order to get your driver's license back. And they include multiple different types of suspensions under Ohio law. We'll go into each type in detail a little bit later in the presentation, but just as a preview, a license forfeiture is, you fail to appear or pay a fine related to a wide variety of traffic violations from, like driving with the taillight out to, a wide variety of seatbelt, right? Not wearing your seatbelt. Failure to pay child support can result in suspension. Non-compliance is driving without insurance. Security suspension is driving without insurance and getting into an accident, right? A judgment suspension is driving without insurance, getting into an accident, and then getting sued because of that accident and not being able to pay the judgment. Court registration blocks and warrant blocks, which sort of function like future suspensions. What they do is they block a driver's ability to re-register their car or do other things so that they can't drive legally at some point in the future. How long do debt-related suspensions last? And the annoying question is, or the annoying answer rather, is it depends, right? Because we're talking about a basket of many different types of suspensions. And it depends based on the type of suspension, the number of that type of suspension someone has or has had in the past. For instance, for a non-compliance suspension, each non-compliance suspension that a driver receives within a 5-year period, well, the length of suspensions from a period of mandatory suspension will kick in if you have more than one, right? Suspension, compliance-related suspension within the last 5 years. Some suspensions last until you do all the things that you need to do to comply with the suspension terms. Again, since for non-compliance, again, you have to get proof of insurance and you have to pay a reinstatement fee. Other suspensions have expiration dates. We're going to talk briefly about security suspensions later on. Security suspensions have a 2-year period after which they expire, essentially. They can convert to a different type of suspension if some actions are taken, but that type of suspension expires after 2 years. How much does it cost to lift a driver's license suspension, right? We're talking about debt. We're talking about money, the paying of money. The same answer, it depends. All suspensions require, or almost all suspensions require, the payment of a reinstatement fee to the Ohio Bureau of Motor Vehicles, BMV, before the BMV will list the suspension. And the amounts vary. And again, it varies by type. It also varies by how many of these types of suspensions you've had in the past. And it can range from $25 to $650. Again, compliance suspensions, driving without insurance. Your first compliance suspension, the reinstatement fee, plus this weird administrative fee that isn't an option, comes to $150, right? But if you get a second non-compliance suspension within a 5-year period, that reinstatement fee jumps over $100, right? And then third, it jumps again. So they can really pile up. In addition to reinstatement fees, which are paid to the Bureau of Motor Vehicles, right, the Ohio BMV, there are also fines and fees that courts can impose related to various traffic violations. And so those need to be paid to the court, in addition to the reinstatement fee that needs to be paid to the BMV in order to get a driver's license back. So what options do they have? What are some things that drivers can take advantage of to either get rid of suspensions or minimize the potential damage that suspensions can cause? Some suspensions allow you to request a hearing to contest them, right? Non-compliance suspensions do, security suspensions do. where if the driver has a defense, and those defenses are sort of defined by statute, they can request an administrative hearing before the BMV and say, hey, I shouldn't have this suspension because maybe I had insurance, or maybe the accident that I got into was absolutely not my fault. Not a chance that if somebody sued me in court on that accident that I'd be found liable. You got to be careful though, because these the periods in which to request an administrative hearing are short, right? And sometimes they're as short as 10 days. So when a driver gets a notice in the mail from the BMV that tells them they have the suspension, the first hurdle is understanding the notice, right? But then the second one, if they have a defense, if they want to request an administrative appeal, they have to act within the period that the notice identifies. If you have reinstatement fees that you can't afford to pay off, the BMV does have an amnesty program. And that program, although it was temporary a couple of years ago, it is now permanent. A good thing under the program is that drivers who qualify automatically, right? So the BMV will send a notice and say, hey, you qualify for this amnesty deal. We're going to reduce your reinstatement fees by a percentage. But drivers will always have to provide information. The BMV will request information from them that the drivers will have to provide before the reinstatement fee is paid down. There's even an option to get the reinstatement fee wiped out completely if the driver qualifies. And that's essentially if they make less than a certain amount of money. If they qualify for SNAP benefits or TANF, that's indicia, or Ohio Medicaid. All of that is evidence that they could be entitled to a complete waiver of reinstatement fees. They can request a payment plan, right? And you can request a payment plan of fines and fees from a court if a court is imposing fines and fees on you related to a traffic violation or a suspension. And you can also request a payment plan from the BMV. An interesting nuance is you can request a payment plan based on fines and fees and the reinstatement fee from a court. But if you're working directly with the BMV, they only deal with the reinstatement fees, right? So you can request a reinstatement or a payment plan on those reinstatement fees, but the fines imposed by a court, you have to deal with the court for those. A driver may be able to request temporary limited driving privileges during a period of suspension. Some suspensions allow this, some suspensions don't. What it does is you go to a court, you file a motion, and there's a link here for a sample motion for Cleveland Municipal Court to apply for limited driving privileges. And the court says, hey, here's a piece of paper that gives you permission to drive to do certain things, go to work, go to medical appointments, transport children, etc. But and that would allow you to drive, even though you have a suspended license, to do these certain enumerated things, right? But beyond those things, you're out of luck. And some suspensions don't allow that. For instance, security suspensions. The driver can't obtain driving privileges while a security suspension is on their license. Another way drivers can get out of sort of the debt imposed by reinstatement fees and other debt-related suspensions is bankruptcy, right? It's a pretty drastic step. But bankruptcy will discharge reinstatement fees imposed by the BMV. And in certain suspensions, like a security suspension that is based on the inability to pay a debt, you can discharge that debt in bankruptcy and the suspension goes away. Also, judgment suspensions that we'll talk about in a little bit, you can discharge a debt imposed by a judgment in bankruptcy. So that is also an option for a lot of drivers. So that completes my portion of the presentation. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley Loike to talk a little bit about the specific suspensions and dig in a little bit more than I have. Ashley?
All right. So I am going to get into some nuts and bolts here. Don't take any notes or anything like that. The kind of end-all be-all resource is going to be linked at the end of this PowerPoint. It's made by a local attorney named Bob Walton. It's on Garfield Municipal Court's website. It's the handbook. It's the Bible if you're doing any of this. So it's available to you. I use it as a reference every day. So I'm just going to kind of talk through some of these suspensions. And then at the end, I'll pull up 4 different BMV reports for our clients that are set for pretrial this coming week and kind of show you how to read those. So the non-compliance suspensions are a result of not showing insurance when you get pulled over. So when a police officer pulls you over, they ask for a license, proof of insurance. There's a little box on the ticket that they can check insurance shown, insurance not shown. So if that box is checked no, insurance not shown, you resolve the ticket, then the BMV is notified and you have a non-compliance suspension. Mike touched on this already. It's an escalating suspension. Your first offense, you can go right to the BMV and get your license back. It'll cost you $100 plus that $50 processing fee. If you do 2 in 5 years, you have to wait 1 year before you can get your license back. And then the third offense, you have to wait 2 years before you get your license back, and that reinstatement fee goes up. The other thing that you have to do to get your license back is file an SR-22 bond with the BMV. SR-22 bonds are very expensive. They're very problematic for my clients. 9 times out of 10, they're prohibitively expensive for my clients. And if you fail to make a monthly payment on your SR-22, your license is immediately suspended, sometimes without notifying the driver. So how is this debt related? Well, you get a ticket, so you have to pay your ticket with court costs. And then you have the reinstatement fee for not having insurance. So you have to pay the reinstatement fee plus the processing fee. That's on top of your ticket and your court costs. And then you have this monthly $200, $300 a month insurance payment for the SR-22 bond that if you forget it or incur any expenses that are extraordinary for the month, you will immediately be suspended again. So, and I will say if you've picked up 3 offenses in 5 years, you probably have not taken care of the reinstatement fees or the tickets for the last 2 offenses in the 5 years. So you can see how this escalates out of control pretty quickly for our clients. It's the most common suspension that we do see in Cleveland, and it really can ring our clients up for quite some time. So that's a non-compliance. You can switch, Mike. Thank you. Oh, and if you have any questions, we don't have a lot of people here, so just either send a question in the chat box or put up a hand or something and bring it to my attention. Judgment suspensions, they usually arise out of an accident where your driver is uninsured. The injured party will sue civilly the driving party, and they get a judgment for an amount of money. They hold your license as a result. I would say most of my clients don't know about the lawsuit. They don't have constant addresses. So these judgment suspensions come out of default judgment, which stinks. Or they get the summons or the complaint. They don't know what to do with it. It never gets delivered, something like that. So, and it especially stinks because judgment suspensions are kind of eternal. And the only way to get rid of them is either by paying off the suspension or filing for bankruptcy. And I have worked with a couple of the collections firms, and just anecdotally, my clients tell me that they will not accept payments. And if they're going to accept a partial payment, they want a pretty big chunk. So if the judgment is for $8,000, they would probably want $5,000 to $5,500 upfront, which is like asking my clients to sprout wings and fly. So it's very difficult for them if they have a judgment suspension. Security suspension is similar in that it arises out of an accident with no insurance. It's a 2-year suspension though, so my clients can kind of ride that out if they want. You can dissolve it in bankruptcy. It doesn't need a judgment from the court at all. It's kind of a function of statute, and it applies to damages arising from an accident as well. Kind of similar to that judgment suspension, but it does have a termination date. So there's at least a little bit of hope there. Forfeitures arise out of either not showing up to court or not paying a fine. So if you get a ticket, for example, driving under suspension, you miss your arraignment date, is written wrong, or you forget about it, the court will issue a warrant, and then they will put a license forfeiture onto the BMV, which will block you from having a license. It's a suspension that is indefinite. So you will have that suspension until you either show up to court or if the ticket is waiverable, meaning like a speeding ticket or something, you can just pay online. You pay the ticket. I will say that from just anecdotally, a lot of courts aren't using these anymore because they sort of recognize the, vicious cycle of it all. If you owe money and you can't work, then you can't make money. So how are you going to pay it? So a lot of courts like South Euclid, Parma, in Cleveland won't impose a forfeiture, but they will impose a warrant block, which are related. You can't get rid of forfeitures in bankruptcy. You can't get driving privileges. And probably worst of all is that most statutes make driving under a forfeiture suspension a first-degree misdemeanor, meaning our clients could get up to $1,000 in fines or even 6 months in jail if they're driving under forfeiture. So it's the same level as a domestic violence or an assault charge, which is very egregious in my book. Warrant blocks are also for not paying tickets or not showing up to court. However, they don't carry a suspension, which is nice, which is why I think courts are using warrant blocks more. Kind of different from forfeitures in that you can block your client from getting their license issues resolved. So you can actually have a valid license, but have a block. So when your license expires, you can't reinstate your license or, renew your license. The reinstatement fees here are really small. I think that's because they really want you to go to court and pay off that fine. Courts will oppose additional court costs if they have to issue warrant blocks. So that's kind of an insult to injury there. And when I advise my clients about this, I usually tell them, address your warrant blocks first. You can't really do anything about anything else unless you clear your warrant blocks out. And then here's a slurry of other suspensions from the handbook. 12-point suspensions. So each moving violation is 2 points. There's some that are 4 or 6. Driving under suspension is 6. If you pick up 12 points in 2 years, you get a 12-point suspension. They're usually pretty easy to fix. You just have to take the driver's test or the remedial driver course, and you need a $40 reinstatement fee. You also, this is actually more debt related than you would think because you need a car to take your driver's test. So if you are borrowing a car from, say, your aunt or your grandma, that car has to be in perfect working order. So you can't have a broken taillight, you can't have a broken windshield, you can't have a headlight out, anything like that. You have to make sure that your car is in perfect working order. So for example, my clients will say, well, I have the driver's test that's scheduled, but I have to borrow a car from a friend and I'm not sure they're going to let me. So that, I think even that really does disparately impact my indigent clients and clients of color. Habitual alcoholic and drug use usually relates to a drug-related offense out of county court or an alcohol-based offense. They can suspend your license for things like that. High school dropout relates to obviously dropping out of high school. And it's a $40 reinstatement fee and either re-enrolling in high school or turning 21. So that's not a super problematic one. We don't see that one a lot. Your administrative license suspension is related to DUIs. So once you blow over the legal limit, the BMV immediately suspends your license without any sort of process or procedure. Those are tough for my clients because their reinstatement fees are very high. For your first OVI, your reinstatement fee will be $450. Anne's asking me a question. Can we talk about how people would clear their warrant blocks? Yes. I have a couple warrant blocks that are on my BMV printouts, so I can walk through exactly how to clear those. So the medical suspensions are for if you have seizures, eye problems, stuff like that, not really super important. Violator compacts, these are tricky for our clients. There's 34 states in the United States that have a compact with Ohio and with all the other states, where if you have a suspension in, say, Tennessee, they can suspend your Tennessee license and also your Ohio license. So whatever you did in Tennessee, anything that we just talked about, if it happened in Tennessee, they'll tell Ohio, and Ohio will suspend your license, which is tough for our clients because a lot of times it will require them to travel to Tennessee to take care of their court cases, which will be prohibitively expensive. And then finally, child support suspensions. The enforcement agency can suspend a person's license if they owe child support. In my experience, the child support courts have been pretty gracious about getting privileges so that the owing party can work, because that's how we pay child support. Okay. So that's kind of how the BMV and the courts communicate with each other. They will tell the BMV if there's no proof of insurance. They will tell the BMV if someone fails to appear to court. They will tell the BMV if there's warrant blocks, forfeitures, registration blocks, and they will block you for judgments. So here is what a BMV report looks like. So any party is able to get their BMV report by putting in their license number, date of birth, social, into the Ohio BMV website. So when a client calls us, it's usually reactive. It's not proactive. They usually have a driving under suspension case in the city of Cleveland, and then the court sent them to the public defender's office and said, you need an attorney to help you with their license. So that's when we get involved. So the first thing that we'll do is we'll run their report. And this individual has court coming up, I think, next week. He applied and qualified for the amnesty reduction, which is the first star on the left there. So he had his reinstatement fees reduced through the amnesty programs, which is great. And then you can see in the circled sections, he has a child support suspension from 2004. So that means that that child is not a child anymore, but he hasn't taken care of the suspension from not paying child support 20 years ago. So it's still on his BMV report and it's still holding him up. If you look over to the right, there's an old non-compliance suspension from 2008, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, number of warrant blocks, 6. So if this client came to me and asked how to get his license together, I would pretty much tell him first, you have to go talk to child support. You got to go take care of that. If the mom is no longer interested in child support, they may just close the file, but you got to follow up. And then second, I would tell them, you got to call Garfield, Shaker, Maple, Cleveland, and Bedford, because all of those are unpaid tickets that they would have to go and reach out to each one of those courts. It'll say case under every BM. I know it's kind of hard to read this, but each warrant block will say case. You would give the clerk of courts the case number. The clerk of courts number is right under the block there. Give the case number, and then the clerk should give some direction as to if it was non-appearance for a ticket, here's a new court date, or how to get a new court date. Or if it's just, I owe money, they'll tell you how much they owe. I will say that Garfield, real tricky. They won't take payment plans. They want the full amount up front. Cleveland will give you court community work service. Some judges are more generous about it than others. Some will give you 50 hours, which is really awful. I don't know anything about Maple Heights Mayor's Court. Shaker's pretty generous as well. So if I were advising this person, I would say, talk to child support, work through your warrant blocks, and then we can reinstate you.
Ashley, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
So a warrant block sounds pretty scary. A warrant. If I go to these courts to try to resolve them, should I be worried about getting arrested or something like that?
Right. That's a super common question that our clients do give us. If I have a warrant block, do I have a warrant? And the answer is sometimes, right? So if you have a warrant block because you failed to appear at, I don't know, an arraignment for an OVI, maybe you have a warrant and a bond. The only way to find out is by calling these courts to figure out what it is. If you just owe money, these courts aren't going to lock you up for that. This individual, this is an example of how license forfeitures operate. So you can, the first, on the right side, you've got a forfeiture on the top right and then the bottom left. Both of those are going to require going to those courts, figuring out what you need to do to clear those, and then going back to the BMV. You also have a 12-point suspension. We kind of talked about those. Not really worth your time to worry about a remedial class if you've got a forfeiture. And then, of course, on the bottom right is kind of the kick in the teeth. He has a hard time non-compliance suspension for a period of 1 year that won't terminate till the end of this year. So if this person came in to ask me what to do, I would first tell them, well, you should really get onto the amnesty program if you qualify, because they owe almost $1,000, $729 in reinstatement fees. And then you got to figure out what Oberlin wants and what Cleveland Heights wants. I've never practiced in Oberlin, but I can't imagine that they're super gracious about fines and costs. But that's going to hold you up indefinitely until the forfeitures are cleared. But I would reiterate to this particular individual that we really can't do anything with your license and getting it valid until December 9th of this year.
And Ashley, is it right that for those who qualify for the amnesty program, they only qualify once, right? Like you can only take advantage of it once?
You know,
right?
I'm not sure if that's true.
Okay.
I hope it's not. I can ask though and find out. This is an example of those violator compact suspensions. So you can see at the bottom of the circled portion, it says Florida Court, Broward County Clerk of Courts. And she actually has two. You can see they're from different days, May 7 and June 11. So we would have to call over to Broward County, Florida, figure out what was going on there. If it was just a matter of paying, we can try to see if they'll do a payment plan or something like that. Or if they have to appear in court, she's got to find enough money to get all the way to Florida, stay there long enough to finish their traffic ticket, and then come back up here to get the compact suspension lifted. So that's going to be problematic for this lady. And then, like Mike said, these suspensions do kind of compound over time. So she also has a non-compliance suspension. It looks like her first in the 5-year period that started in July of 21. And then if I had to guess, the warrant block from Bedford is where the non-compliance came from. So she resolved a ticket in Bedford, didn't show insurance, then didn't pay the ticket, and must have just been not getting stuff done, which happens because life happens. So this lady has 4 different suspensions, 2 violator compacts, a warrant block, and a non-compliance. If I were advising her, I would say you got to figure out Broward County first. And then she's kind of stuck. And then this is the last example that I wanted to show you. This is the security suspension. This particular lady, actually, Lisa, you represented her on Tuesday. This is a security suspension from May 2020. It was obviously an accident. And you can see the default claim amount is $56,414.70. Great. Yeah, she'll get right on that. Luckily, this one will terminate October 6th of this year, so she can ride that out. And then because this was an accident with no insurance shown, she also has the non-compliance, which is what the arrow is pointing to. So those two came together. And then she also has a non-compliance from this year in February, which will run until March of 2024, because that's going to be the 3-year hard time for having 5 non-compliances within 5 years. And then the forfeitures underneath both of those non-compliance suspensions look like they may be related to those as well. So she keeps picking up tickets, keeps driving without valid insurance. And this is the really good example of the spiraling that happens. And you know, this one's a hard one to advise your clients about, because you can't get privileges over a security suspension. You can't get privileges over a forfeiture. And you basically have to tell them you cannot drive, which is a really hard conversation to have with your clients. there you have it.
So here are some resources. We'll provide the PowerPoint, of course, and these links are live, so you should be able to access them from the PDF. But the BMV website, that's what Ashley just spent time going over, has a lot of information. You can really figure out a lot just by looking up your driver's license record. We have Legal Aid produced a flyer that's double-sided. It's a simple what to do if your driver's license is suspended, and it's sort of a step-by-step guide. Check your record, etc. Go down the line. It can be useful. Ashley mentioned the driver's license reinstatement handbook. That is a tremendous resource. It's written for lawyers, but I think it's pretty accessible, and it has everything you need to know. It's really tremendous. Ohio Legal Help has some valuable information about driver's license suspensions. You plug in some information, and it tells you sort of what courts you have to go to and what you need to do. And lastly, Legal Aid's Road to Nowhere report, which is our analysis of data surrounding debt-related suspensions in Ohio, where they are, why they are, and what are possible alternatives to taking away people's ability to drive because they can't pay a debt, which prevents them from paying a debt because they can't earn any money. Doesn't seem all that productive. So we have plenty of time for questions.
Thank you both very much. I had a question. Can suspensions ever lead to a person having their vehicle impounded?
Yes. Yeah. I would say not the suspension, but if you get pulled over for driving under suspension, especially a forfeiture, they can immediately seize and immobilize your vehicle. And then you have to pay to get it out of impound, pay the impound fees. Yes.
So I think I'm just repeating back to you what you said, but to make sure I understood, if you already have a license forfeiture suspension, and then you are stopped for whatever reason, and they discover you are driving under the license forfeiture suspension, that would potentially trigger seizing the vehicle.
Yep, they can arrest you, book you, and impound your car.
And you had said earlier that one is a first-degree misdemeanor. Are there other driving under suspension? Because there's a general driving under suspension, like criminal charge, right? Just generic. But then there's all the specific ones?
Yes.
Okay.
So non-compliance has no jail time. Failure to reinstate has no jail time, and not having, like driving with attempts or just not having your physical license on you, no license, those have no jail time. So the forfeiture is jailable. And then under some of the local codes, just the straight driving under suspension is also jailable. Most of the courts are not going to put people in jail for just driving without a license. The last judge who did that a lot is removed from the bench now. So I think a lot of courts are pretty generous about not doing that.
I could say, previous to, I guess, about a year ago, a little bit more, the notices that the BMV would send out to people when they received certain suspensions, especially non-compliance and security suspensions, were so hard to understand that Legal Aid realized that none of our clients, none of the people that came to us with this problem knew ahead of time that they had the problem or what to do to fix it. So that's how I got involved with suspensions. We wanted to take a look at those notices, and we ended up bringing a case against the BMV about how hard to read those notices are, arguing that, this is a violation of persons' rights. They don't know what they can do to contest these suspensions. They don't know that they have a constitutional right to a hearing. And we ended up getting those notices changed, and we ended up rewriting them in cooperation with the BMV, and they're a lot better now. And I was pleased to see that the BMV not only applied those changes to the notices that we were paying attention to, which is the non-compliance and security suspension, but has started using applying those same changes to other notices as well. So hopefully, as time goes on, more notices get rewritten, and you know, that people understand more clearly why they have a suspension, what they need to do to get rid of it, and maybe how to challenge it.
And I kind of referenced this with the judgment suspensions, but a lot of times our clients don't have updated addresses on whatever license that they have. So even if it was easy to read, they might not get it to the right address anyway.
And I didn't show the slide, but the last slide of the presentation is my contact info and Ashley's contact info. You know, I won't speak for Ashley, but feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions about, you know, any of this stuff.
And we do regularly practice in Cleveland and Lakewood. So if you ever run into a client who has blocks, warrants, anything in either of those courts, just reach out. We'd be happy to help you. Or in other courts, we can just get you kind of a dummy motion, and we can have the client file pro se.
Any other questions? All right, there's messages in the chat. We're going to send the slides later today, and application for all CEUs is pending, right? All right. Well, thanks for coming. I hope you learned about how to deal with driver's license suspension so you can better assist those that you serve. Yeah, I hope the resources included in the PowerPoint prove helpful in the future. Bye, everybody.